Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and we are doing a deep dive into the historical background behind the book of Esther. And we're trying to get a sense of this Achaemenid dynasty, these kings who ruled over Persia and who were very colorful characters surrounded by very colorful characters. Now, in addition to the story that we've been working through about the origins of Persia and the origins of this dynasty, in addition to that just being ludicrously juicy and salacious and interesting and dramatic and good, it is also, in a practical sense, helpful to you and I in the task of positioning ourselves to understand the book of Esther, because we're getting a sense of how storytelling worked at this time. We're getting a sense of the twists of justice and the expectations of an audience member at this moment in history when they were reading Herodotus, when they were reading Xenophon, when they were reading Ctesias, those three Greek guys who wrote about a lot of this stuff. And if we understand what their expectations were when they were reading the storytelling of those guys, it might help us to better understand what their expectations were and what the rhythms of good storytelling sounded like when that same audience would have encountered the book of Esther. So for those of you who are less fans of the history side of this conversation, I just want to take a minute and say you rule. I commend you, because if you don't like history, you don't like history. I don't know how you don't like history. I think it's just awesome. But hey, I understand it's not everybody's bag, and we're doing a big setup for this book here. So thank you for absorbing this whole story and trusting that it's going to pay off as we get into the actual book of the Bible that we're setting out to look at. At this point, we're only a couple of kings away from the one we run into in the book of Esther. When we left off yesterday, Cyrus's grandpa, the king of the Medes, a guy named Astyages, had just carried out a brutally ruthless, cruel punishment against his right-hand man, Harpagus, for not obeying an order to kill young baby Cyrus, Astyages' grandson. I'm not going to say again what that punishment was. In case you were plugging your ears yesterday, just know it's like the most horrifying, gross, awful thing that anybody could possibly dream up or imagine. And Herodotus, who is the guy who brings that story to us, he tells us that Harpagus took that somewhat personally and did not quickly forget it. Herodotus writes, Harpagus sought to become Cyrus's friend and sent him gifts because he desired to take vengeance on Astyages. And then it goes on to say, Harpagus communicated secretly with the chief men of the Medes and persuaded them that they must make Cyrus their leader and cause Astyages to cease from being king. Now, I told you yesterday, we're going back and forth between the interesting version of the story and the boring version of the story. The boring version is the only one that we can really say with certainty. It's our best guess based on actual evidence. But then there's also the interesting version, and that's the one that we get from Herodotus. Well, sometimes the interesting version provides a plausible explanation for what happens in the boring version. Long story short, Cyrus grows up, as we talked about. He gets married, he has kids, and Astyages ultimately sends Harpagus to lead the invasion of Persia after Cambyses I is dead and Cyrus is now king as a grown man after 559 BC. Well, it's generally accepted by historians that the Medes probably would have won that fight if all of the Medes had continued to fight on the side of the Medes. But interestingly, Harpagus gets onto the battlefield and switches sides with his army over to Cyrus, and then Cyrus and the Persians easily defeat Astyages and the Medes. Why would Harpagus do that? Well, maybe in reality he did it because he could just read the writing on the wall, and he was like, Cyrus is probably going to win. The future is Cyrus. Astyages is kind of crazy. He believes in weird dreams. He's paranoid. I'm going to cast my lot with this young buck, Cyrus. Or maybe all that crazy stuff that we read about yesterday is what actually happened, and Harpagus was harboring this grudge. And much like Cyrus, who is very good at doing not just the expedient thing, but the expedient thing in the right moment, maybe Harpagus was like, I'm going to wait until it would hurt Astyages the most to play my hand and take my revenge for what he did to my son and what he did to me. Now, I'm giving you the quick version here. This took a few years to work out, and eventually Cyrus conquers the capital of the Medes, which is a place called Ecbatana. This will be an important town. It'll be a summer retreat up in the high country for Persian kings for decades, even centuries to come. And it's with that capture of Ecbatana that Astyages is deposed. And now, just out of nowhere, in the matter of just a few years, The Persians have the upper hand in this whole scramble for power in the ancient world. But Cyrus is clever. He knows that he is not well enough established to just say, I own everything now, everybody bend the knee. Instead, he has to woo the remaining Medes. He has to make all of their bannermen and allies like the idea of working with Cyrus now instead of with Astyages. And so Cyrus shows mercy to his grandpa Astyages, doesn't kill him. In fact, Herodotus says that he treats him pretty well in his forced early retirement. And Cyrus even takes a second wife, Amytis, the daughter of Astyages. Now, you're probably doing the math on all of this, and you're like, if he married his grandpa's daughter, aren't we getting into like an I am my own grandpa kind of situation here? And the answer is yes. Oh, that's getting weird. See, he married his aunt. And then after that, there's going to be some sibling intermarriage that happens within this Achaemenid dynasty. And it gets real weird and real backwards. And I haven't gamed it all the way out to figure out who becomes related to themselves, how as a result of all of this. But this was done back then. Marriages pacified hard feelings and marriages ensured alliances. It was almost like really classy, high-end hostage exchanges to ensure good behavior. Now, here's the truth. Even though people tried to heap really flattering titles on Astyages, history does not remember him as Astyages the Great, and they do remember Cyrus as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was an instant upgrade at the head coach position for all of the Medes and the Persians, and because of his sheer competence alone and his level-headed leadership, they became the instant favorite to win the competition for who would be the next great empire. Even though Babylon theoretically held that title, they held it very loosely. And it's only a matter of a few years before the Medes and the Persians, but really the Persians, in 539 conquer the city of Babylon. Now, this is recorded in the book of Daniel. You might remember this business. Where are we at time-wise? Tomorrow, we're going to read from the book of Daniel about the moment where Babylon fell apart and Persia came to town. And we're going to see how those events in Daniel move us a lot closer to what's going on in Esther. All right, Daniel tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
Thank you to all of you who have taken the time to leave a rating and review on your podcast apps. We're grateful because it's encouraging and it helps new people find their way here.